Hi folks, John Cordisco back again. Try to catch up on some of my videos. In a couple of days, look for some videos from me for one of my favorite tournaments coming up here in the U.S. One of the legs of the Grand Chess Tour, the Singfield Cup, right here in the U.S. in St. Louis. Great tournament. Nakamura, Wesley So, Magnus Carlsen, of course. All the great players. It's one of the best tournaments in the world. Looking forward to that. So look for those videos, but trying to get some of the videos caught up. I'm running for a local election, and between that and running my business, time's a little tight, but this is round 3 of Dortmund Chess 2015. This is a classic game. As white, former world champion Vladimir Kramnik, and as black, Ian Nepomniachtchi. This is a classic Kramnik game where you take it a small advantage and just grind it. Let's get to it. I probably gave it away already, but it's going to be a symmetrical English. Transposes. We'll go through the opening here. We're not really big on opening theory in these videos. Pawn takes, queen checks, knight, castles, rook to d1. That pawn can't be saved, so we just leave it there on c4. Knight comes up, queen a3, queen takes, pawn takes, a4. Let's stop it here. Take a good look at this. It's interesting to say the least. Small advantage for white, even though black is up a pawn. I'm trying to look here. I don't see how white has the advantage, but the only thing that I can see so far is kind of annoying is the fact that this bishop's hitting this pawn, which is right now freezing this bishop. So we'll see how that works out. a6. That's to stop the knight from coming in and going after the pawn here or even here and raising havoc in black's camp. Bishop to f4 by Kramnik, going after the backward pawn. Typical. Knight to e8. Looks like Nepomniachtchi wants to hold on to that. Now sometimes I do this myself. I'm just an average player, where you'll be up a pawn and as your opponent tries to get the pawn back or goes after a backward pawn, you use all of your minor pieces to help protect that pawn. And what happens is you end up with a crappier position. You might as well just give the pawn back. We'll see if that's the case in this case. Rook a to c1. Give you an idea if he went a5, those of you that are wondering. After knight to d7, rook comes up hitting that pawn. Bishop takes, rook takes, knight to c5. And white's sitting pretty good there. Rook to a3 maybe. Rook on a takes c4. Looks pretty good. But after rook a to c1, black comes up. And that's a good spot for that knight. I think I chase it off as another knight and that bishop, but there it is, that pesky pawn again is in pre. So this bishop can't come up and challenge. But he decides to do it anyway. So he gives the pawn back. Knight takes. Rook takes. Bishop c6. Gives the pawn back to open up his pieces a little bit. Good move on Nepomniachtchi's part. I'll just call him Nepo. That's what everybody calls him. Bishop takes. Pawn takes. Rook takes. Now white's up a pawn. I think all that maneuvering trying to save his pawn got him in a jam. It's about a 1.25 advantage for white at this point. And I think Nepo is just trying to draw this, frankly. Rook to c5. Rook comes over. Knight goes here, threatening to go to c6, forking both rooks. Rook comes up to d2. Rook to b5. Knight. Rook takes, knight takes. Okay, I think it's a little bit more breathing room for black. He's still down a pawn, but he's got two isolated pawns. The A and the C pawn. That's going to make it tough. Knight. Knight to d7. How is he going to protect those pawns? Knight gives up another pawn. But the bishop takes, trading pawns off. And now here you are. Nepomniachtchi, world-class player, rated over 2,700 against Kramnik. And you're down a pawn in this crappy endgame. That's a tough road to hoe right here. It's less than a pawn advantage for white, but it's a hell of a lot easier to play white than it is black right now. The only thing I do have to say is both of white's knights on the queen side, they're kind of redundant, helping each other. The rook's guarding the A pawn, but what do you do here as black? Of course, white's easy enough. Play king to f1. Knight hitting the pawn and the rook. Rook goes to e4. Now it's almost an even game now. I think Nepo might be crawling back here. Let's see how this works out. f5. Once you get the pawns down, okay. Rook checks. King comes up. Rook goes to b8. Hitting the knight. The knight takes. And the knight to c6. Hitting the pawn. So he's going to get it back. Knight to c3. Knight takes. Rook checks first. Important to make that king move. King to g2. Now knight takes. Okay. Nepo's back even. But these multiple minor piece rook endings, it's a little bit easier when all the pawns are on the same side of the board. So let's see what happens here. How does Nepo handle this? Knight c4. They're going to maneuver around the pieces for a while, so I'm just going to go through it. You can go stop the video and check it if you want to, but they're just maneuvering their pieces. It looks like white's moving in on black's king. And same for black. All of black's pieces are down on the white end. Let's see who gets there first. Knight to c3. Now the pawns are starting to move, open up the game a little bit. Rook moves. You got to be, all those knight moves, you got to be careful. h5, stopping almost all of white's advance with his pawns. Rook to a7, bishop. They're just maneuvering around now. Now we're on move 41. Not sure if they were in time trouble or not, but they aren't now. King. And we're just going to go through, and they're just maneuvering around. He's trying to get some kind of mating net set up. Almost looks like mate here, but it's not, of course. Rook here, because the king can escape. Knight. And this is where I think sometimes you're getting a game like this where you're shuffling your pieces around. You miscue. Now we all see why, of course. Knight doesn't take. Because knight checks. Dropping the rook. There's a lot of other things as well. There's a lot of tactics in here. But Nepo lets down his guard. And goes bishop b5. And that, folks, is the beginning of the end. Over a 2-point advantage now for white. The only hope was knight to c3. Then after knight checks, king, knight, king. That was a chance to draw. But after bishop b5, knight to b7, knight to d8, and then Nepo miscues again. He's trying to open up the position a little bit. He goes pawn to g5, and that's a disaster. Bishop takes g3, and after rook takes, knight takes, king to e7, it's still a disaster. But after g5, rook takes, knight checks, king e7, he can't protect the bishop. He miscued. Can't go here because of the knight. Knight takes, king takes, pawn takes, and the rest of it's just technique. So pawn up, isolated pawns, he can't save them. And that's where he resigns. Tough break for Nepomniachtchi. Well done getting through all those middle game there with all the complications with the minor pieces. Well done by Kramnik. I think maybe the older guys have more patience than the younger guys. Well, anyway, folks, that's another game from Dortmund Chess 2015, round 3. I hope you enjoyed it. Two great players, hell of a game. Look for my Singfield Cup videos coming up here in another 2 or 3 days. One of the top tournaments in the world played right here in the old USA. And as I always say, folks, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.